The air in the courtroom hung thick and heavy, a palpable weight pressing down on every soul present. Rows of polished wooden benches were filled, packed shoulder to shoulder with spectators, their faces a mosaic of hushed anticipation and morbid curiosity. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the tall, arched windows, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the aged oak paneling. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic hum of the ventilation system, a mechanical heartbeat in the otherwise oppressive silence. You could feel the gravity of the situation clinging to the very walls. This wasn't just another case. It was an event, a spectacle that had drawn people from all walks of life. Whispers, hushed and reverent, rippled through the crowd like a disturbed flock of birds. Each person seemed to carry their own theory, their own judgment, their own expectation for what was about to unfold. The courtroom itself was a study in contrasts, the imposing grandeur of the architecture, a testament to the power and majesty of the law, stood in stark opposition to the human drama about to play out within its walls. Every detail, from the meticulously arranged flags to the gleaming brass fixtures, seemed to amplify the sense of importance, the sense that something monumental was about to occur. Even the most seasoned observers felt a prickle of unease, a sense that the scales of justice were delicately balanced, ready to tip at any moment. The very air seemed to vibrate with unspoken tension, a silent promise of a revelation to come. Breaking the somber uniformity of the scene was a figure so incongruous he seemed almost a figment of the imagination. A young boy. Perched on the edge of the defendant's chair, he appeared swallowed by the vastness of the courtroom, a small, vulnerable island in a sea of legal formality that he couldn't have been older than 10, maybe even younger. His legs, dangling far above the floor, swung back and forth with a slow, almost rhythmic motion, betraying a hint of nervous energy beneath an otherwise unsettlingly calm exterior. He was dressed in clothes that were clearly not his own, or at least, not meant for this occasion. An oversized, faded blue shirt hung loosely on his thin frame, and the ill-fitting trousers were cuffed haphazardly at the ankles. His hair, usually neatly combed, was now disheveled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it repeatedly. But it was his eyes that truly captivated. They were wide and dark, pools of an ancient wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. There was no fear in them, no panic, only a quiet, unsettling stillness. He met the gazes of the onlookers with an unnerving directness, as if he were the one judging them, not the other way around. Was it bravery, defiance, or simply a childlike inability to fully comprehend the gravity of his situation? He sat there, an enigma wrapped in innocence, a stark contrast to the imposing machinery of the justice system that threatened to engulf him. He was a question mark hanging in the air, demanding an answer that no one seemed ready to provide. Presiding over this unlikely scene, a counterweight to the boy's youthful fragility, was Judge Eleanor Thompson, a figure etched in the annals of the city's legal history. Judge Thompson was renowned for her unwavering commitment to justice, her sharp intellect, and a demeanor that could chill even the most seasoned lawyers. Her silver hair, pulled back in a severe bun, framed a face that bore the map of countless legal battles fought and won. Her eyes, behind half-moon spectacles, missed nothing. Just months prior, she had presided over the infamous City Hall corruption case, a trial that had gripped the city for weeks, exposing a web of deceit and bribery that reached the highest echelons of power. Her handling of that case, her unflinching resolve in the face of immense pressure, her meticulous attention to detail, and her unwavering adherence to the law, had solidified her reputation as a judge who could not be swayed, a bastion of integrity in a world often tainted by compromise. It was this reputation, this aura of unyielding fairness, that both reassured and intimidated the courtroom audience. They knew that whatever verdict she delivered, it would be based on the evidence presented and nothing else. Yet, looking at the small boy before her, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps curiosity, perhaps concern, crossed her face. It was a fleeting moment, quickly masked by her usual stoicism, but it didn't go unnoticed. Even Judge Thompson, it seemed, was not immune to the unusual circumstances of this particular case. The stage was set, the players in place. The legal arguments had been grinding on for hours, a relentless tide of accusations and counter-arguments washing over the courtroom. The prosecution, led by a sharp-tongued woman named Ms. Davies, was unyielding in its pursuit. Her voice, amplified by the microphone, echoed with a conviction that bordered on zealotry. She presented a carefully constructed narrative, piecing together circumstantial evidence with an almost theatrical flair. Each point, each detail, seemed designed to paint the boy as something far more sinister than his innocent appearance suggested. Ms. Davies hammered home the gravity of the charges, her words dripping with implications. While the specific crime remained unspoken, the potential consequences were clear: a future stolen, a life irrevocably altered. The unspoken threat of juvenile detention hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud looming over the boy's head. The defense, a young, somewhat overwhelmed lawyer named Mr. Peterson, did his best to counter the prosecution's onslaught. He argued for reasonable doubt, highlighting inconsistencies in the evidence and appealing to the jury's sense of compassion. But his voice, though impassioned, seemed to lack the force and conviction of Ms. Davies. He was David facing Goliath, armed with only a slingshot and a prayer. With each passing hour, the tension in the courtroom ratcheted up another notch. The boy remained silent, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance, seemingly oblivious to the battle raging around him. But the subtle clenching of his small fists betrayed the inner turmoil he must have been experiencing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Judge Thompson raised a hand, her gesture silencing Ms. Davies mid-sentence. The prosecutor, momentarily caught off guard, snapped her mouth shut, her eyes flashing with a mixture of frustration and respect. The collective breath seemed to escape the assembled spectators, a shared exhalation of pent-up anxiety. The end was near. Judge Thompson adjusted her spectacles, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, taking in every face, every detail. The rhythmic tapping of her pen against the wooden gavel stand was the only sound, each tap echoing like a drumbeat in the suffocating silence. She gathered her notes, meticulously arranging them into a neat stack, her movements deliberate and precise. Every action, every gesture, seemed calculated to heighten the suspense, to prolong the inevitable moment of reckoning. She cleared her throat, a low, resonant sound that reverberated through the room. All eyes were now fixed on her, waiting, anticipating. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with the weight of expectation. This was it. The moment of truth, the verdict that could alter the course of a young boy's life forever. Judge Thompson opened her mouth to speak, the silence stretching to its breaking point, thick and heavy like a physical presence. The courtroom held its breath, suspended in a state of profound anticipation, ready to receive the words that would determine the boy's fate. But the words never came. Just as Judge Thompson parted her lips to speak, a small, clear voice cut through the silence, shattering the carefully constructed atmosphere of anticipation. It was the boy. He had risen from his chair, his small frame trembling slightly, his dark eyes fixed on the judge with an intensity that belied his age. The collective gasps swept through the courtroom, a wave of astonishment and disbelief. It was an unthinkable act, a blatant violation of courtroom decorum. Time seemed to freeze. Every head swiveled towards the boy. Every eye widened in stunned surprise. That Ms. Davies's face contorted in outrage, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Mr. Peterson, the defense lawyer, looked as though he might faint. Judge Thompson's initial reaction was a mixture of shock and barely suppressed fury. Her eyebrows drew together in a deep furrow, and a flush of color rose in her cheeks. She was a woman accustomed to absolute respect, to unwavering obedience in her courtroom. To be so brazenly interrupted, especially at such a critical moment, was an affront to her authority, a challenge to the very foundation of the legal process. Her eyes narrowed, and her lips tightened into a thin, disapproving line. It was clear that the boy's audacious act had crossed a line. The silence that followed was even more profound than before, a silence pregnant with unspoken reprimand and the anticipation of the judge's wrath. Then, he spoke. 4 words, simple yet loaded with an inexplicable power, hung in the air like a specter. 4 words that instantly shifted the tectonic plates of the courtroom. He saw the fire. The words themselves were unremarkable, almost childlike in their simplicity, but it was the way he said them, the unwavering conviction in his voice, the unsettling intensity in his gaze, that imbued them with such force. He saw the fire. Who was he? What fire was he referring to? The question swirled through the courtroom like a sudden, unexpected gust of wind. The ambiguity of the statement was precisely what made it so shocking that it could mean anything or nothing at all. Was it a confession, an accusation, a desperate plea for help? No one could be certain, but one thing was undeniable. The boy's 4 words had irrevocably changed the course of the proceedings. They were a challenge, a riddle, a gauntlet thrown down before the entire legal system. They were a tiny seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of conviction, and in that moment, everything was up for grabs. The air crackled not just with tension, but with the electric hum of uncertainty. The boy's 4 words had silenced the courtroom, not just in sound, but in thought. They had brought the relentless machinery of justice to a screeching halt. The silence that followed the boy's declaration was absolute, a vacuum of sound that seemed to press in on everyone present. It was a silence so profound it felt almost tangible. A heavy blanket smothering the usual hum of the courtroom. Every breath was held, every muscle tensed. It was as if the entire room had been turned into a still life, a tableau of stunned disbelief. Judge Thompson sat frozen, her mouth slightly agape, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The initial fury had been replaced by a look of intense concentration, as if she were trying to decipher a complex code. Ms. Davies, the prosecutor, stood rigid, her face a mask of bewilderment and simmering anger. Her carefully constructed narrative had been derailed, her momentum shattered. Mr. Peterson, the defense lawyer, remained slumped in his chair, his jaw slack, his eyes darting between the boy and the judge, as if trying to grasp the implications of this unexpected turn of events. The jury, a panel of ordinary citizens thrust into extraordinary circumstances, looked utterly bewildered. They exchanged furtive glances, their faces etched with confusion and concern. What did it mean? Who was he? What fire? The questions danced in their eyes, mirroring the uncertainty that now gripped the entire courtroom. And the boy, he stood motionless, his small frame radiating an unnerving calm. His eyes, still fixed on the judge, held a strange mixture of defiance and vulnerability. He had spoken his piece, and now he waited, his fate hanging in the balance, suspended on the thread of those 4 enigmatic words. That he was the eye of the storm, the epicenter of this sudden earthquake, and all around him, the world had stopped turning. Judge Thompson, a woman accustomed to maintaining an iron grip on her courtroom, visibly struggled to regain her composure. She took a deep, steadying breath, the subtle rise and fall of her chest the only movement in the otherwise still room. The color had returned to her face, but her hand, as she reached for the gavel, trembled almost imperceptibly. The boy's 4 words had clearly shaken her, piercing through her carefully constructed facade of impartiality and control. With a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness, she brought the gavel down, the sharp rap echoing through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. "This court will stand in recess for 15 minutes, she announced, her voice regaining its usual firmness, though a slight tremor betrayed her inner turmoil. She rose from her seat, her movements stiff and uncharacteristically hesitant. As she turned to leave the bench, her eyes met the boy's for a brief, fleeting moment. There was no anger in her gaze, no judgment, only a profound curiosity, an unspoken question that mirrored the confusion swirling through the courtroom. It was a look that suggested she recognized the gravity of the situation, the potential for something far more complex than she had initially anticipated. The courtroom buzzed with a low, nervous energy as people began to stir, breaking the spell of silence. But the tension remained, a palpable undercurrent that promised further revelations to come. The 15-minute recess plunged the courtroom into a frenzy of activity, a stark contrast to the preceding silence. The hushed whispers that had characterized the earlier proceedings exploded into a cacophony of speculation and frantic discussion. Lawyers huddled in tight circles, their heads bent low, their voices barely audible above the rising din. Ms. Davies, her face flushed with anger and frustration, gesticulated wildly as she spoke to her colleagues, her words sharp and accusatory. Mr. Peterson, looking both bewildered and relieved, frantically scribbled notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. Behind closed doors, the boy was subjected to intense questioning. Detectives, their faces grim, pressed him for details, demanding to know who he was and what he meant by the fire. The boy, however, remained steadfast, repeating his 4 words with unwavering conviction, offering no further explanation. His silence only fueled the growing sense of mystery and unease that in the spectators section. Speculation ran rampant. Theories, wild and outlandish, were exchanged in hushed tones. Some whispered of a conspiracy, others of a hidden witness, still others of a tragic accident. The boy's 4 words had become a Rorschach test, reflecting the hopes, fears, and prejudices of everyone present. The recess was a pressure cooker, a breeding ground for rumors and suspicions. The carefully constructed facade of the legal process had crumbled, revealing the raw, human emotions that lay beneath. And as the clock ticked down, the tension mounted, promising an even more explosive confrontation. When the court reconvened, to understand the weight of those 4 words, he saw the fire. We must rewind, peel back the layers of legal proceedings and delve into the events that led this young boy to stand accused in a court of law. The story begins not in a courtroom, but in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood, a place where children played in the streets and neighbors knew each other by name. A fire. That's what the authorities called it. A tragic accident that claimed the lives of 2 adults, leaving behind a charred house and a community shattered by grief. The official narrative was simple: faulty wiring, a spark igniting flammable materials, a devastating blaze that spread with terrifying speed. But beneath the surface of that seemingly straightforward explanation, whispers began to circulate, doubts began to fester. The boy, named Samuel, was the sole survivor. He had been staying with his aunt and uncle that night while his parents were away. He escaped the fire, miraculously unharmed, but forever scarred by what he had witnessed. Initially hailed as a hero, a symbol of resilience in the face of tragedy, Samuel soon found himself under suspicion. The authorities, unsatisfied with the initial explanation, began to probe deeper, their investigation focusing increasingly on the young survivor. He became the prime suspect in an arson investigation, accused of deliberately setting the fire that claimed the lives of his own family. The evidence was circumstantial, fragmented, and open to interpretation, but the prosecution was determined to make their case. Samuel was, by all accounts, an ordinary boy. He loved building elaborate Lego castles, devoured comic books with a passion, and dreamed of becoming an astronaut. His parents, Sarah and David, were loving and supportive, always encouraging his curiosity and nurturing his imagination. They lived a simple, comfortable life, filled with laughter and warmth. David worked as an architect, while Sarah was a teacher at the local elementary school. They were active members of their community, volunteering at the local soup kitchen and organizing neighborhood events. Samuel excelled in school, demonstrating a sharp intellect and a thirst for knowledge. He was a quiet, introspective child, often lost in his own thoughts. He had a vivid imagination and a keen sense of observation, noticing details that others often overlooked. He also had a deep empathy for others, a sensitivity to the emotions of those around him. The fire had ripped a hole through this idyllic existence, leaving Samuel orphaned and alone. His parents, on a rare vacation to celebrate their anniversary, had entrusted him to the care of his aunt and uncle, a decision that now haunted him with unbearable guilt. He missed his parents terribly, their absence leaving a gaping void in his life. The accusations that followed only compounded his grief and confusion. How could they possibly think he was capable of such a terrible act? He just wanted his parents back. He wanted his old life back. He wanted the nightmares to stop. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. The unfamiliar surroundings, the absence of his parents, the creaks and groans of the old house, everything conspired to keep him awake. That he tossed and turned in the guest bedroom, his mind racing with anxieties. He missed his bedtime stories, his parents' warm hugs, the comforting weight of his favorite stuffed animal. Around midnight, he heard a noise downstairs, that a faint creaking, like someone walking stealthily. He sat up in bed, His heart pounding in his chest, he thought about waking his aunt and uncle, but he didn't want to bother them. Maybe it was just the wind, he reasoned, but then he smelled it. A faint, acrid smell, like burning plastic. He slipped out of bed and crept towards the door. His bare feet silent on the wooden floor. As he reached the top of the stairs, he saw it, a flickering orange glow emanating from the living room below. Smoke, thick and black, billowed from the doorway. He ran downstairs, his mind filled with panic. He tried to open the living room door, but it was hot to the touch. He shouted for his aunt and uncle, but there was no response. He saw a figure standing in the shadows, silhouetted against the flames. A man, he couldn't make out his face, but he saw him clearly, standing there, watching the fire consume the room. Then, the man turned and disappeared into the darkness. Terrified, Samuel stumbled back, coughing and gasping for air. He managed to escape the house, his lungs burning, his eyes stinging. He ran to the neighbor's house, screaming for help. By the time the fire department arrived, it was too late. The house was engulfed in flames, and his aunt and uncle were trapped inside. All Samuel could remember were the flames, the smoke, and the figure in the shadows. He saw the fire. The 15 minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension in the room. Finally, a bailiff announced the return of Judge Thompson, and a hush fell over the courtroom once more. All eyes turned towards the entrance as the judge re-entered, her demeanor noticeably different from before. The hesitant, almost uncertain steps she had taken during the recess had been replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Her shoulders were squared, her chin held high, and her eyes shone with a steely determination. Whatever had transpired during the break, it had clearly solidified her resolve. The subtle tremor in her hand was gone, replaced by a firm grip on the gavel. She ascended the bench with a newfound authority, her presence commanding attention. She surveyed the courtroom, her gaze lingering for a moment on Samuel, her expression unreadable. It was clear that she had made a decision, that she had formulated a plan. The atmosphere shifted, the uncertainty replaced by a sense of anticipation. The gears of justice, momentarily stalled, were about to grind back into motion. But this time, it felt different. It felt as though the truth, long buried beneath layers of suspicion and doubt, was finally about to surface. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, a final reckoning that would determine Samuel's fate. Before we proceed, Judge Thompson began, her voice resonating with a newfound authority. I must address the events that transpired before the recess. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, ensuring that every eye was upon her. Young Mr. Samuel's outburst, while unconventional, has raised questions that cannot be ignored. She acknowledged the seriousness of his interruption, but instead of reprimanding him, she framed it as a crucial piece of information that needed to be explored. The court, she continued, is committed to uncovering the truth, no matter where it may lead. Therefore, I am ordering a new line of inquiry, focusing specifically on Mr. Samuel's claim that someone else saw the fire. She instructed the prosecution to present any evidence they had regarding other individuals who may have been present at the scene of the fire. She also authorized the defense to call any new witnesses that could shed light on Samuel's account. We will not rest, she declared, until we have exhausted every possible avenue of investigation. The pursuit of justice demands nothing less. Her words hung in the air, a clear indication that the trial had taken a dramatic turn. That Samuel's 4 words had not only silenced the courtroom, but they had also redirected the course of justice. The focus had shifted from Samuel's alleged culpability to the possibility of another suspect, a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness. A witness to the inferno. That Samuel's 4 words became the key that unlocked a Pandora's box of hidden truths and long-suppressed secrets. The new line of inquiry prompted a re-examination of the evidence, revealing inconsistencies and overlooked details that had previously been dismissed as insignificant. A neighbor, initially hesitant to come forward, now recalled seeing a suspicious vehicle parked near the house on the night of the fire. A firefighter, during a routine inspection of the debris, discovered traces of an accelerant that had not been detected in the initial investigation. The prosecution, scrambling to maintain control of the narrative, found their carefully constructed case crumbling before their eyes. The circumstantial evidence that had seemed so damning now appeared flimsy and unreliable. Doubts began to creep into the minds of the jury, their initial conviction wavering under the weight of new information. The narrative shifted from a story of a vengeful child to a tale of conspiracy and deceit. It became clear that someone had deliberately set the fire, and that Samuel had been wrongly accused, a convenient scapegoat in a much larger game. The initial assumptions of the case were challenged, forcing everyone involved to confront the uncomfortable possibility that they had been wrong all along. The truth, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, began to emerge, slowly but surely, casting a long shadow over the courtroom and threatening to expose the dark secrets that had been hidden for so long. The turning point came with the emergence of a previously unknown witness, a reclusive elderly man named Mr. Abernathy, who lived across the street from Samuel's aunt and uncle. Mr. Abernathy, a man of few words and even fewer social interactions, had initially refused to cooperate with the investigation, claiming he had seen nothing of significance. However, the renewed focus on Samuel's account, coupled with the relentless pressure from the defense team, finally convinced him to come forward. He was a reluctant witness, clearly uncomfortable with the attention and scrutiny, but his testimony proved to be devastating. In a hushed voice, barely audible above the murmur of the courtroom, Mr. Abernathy recounted what he had seen on the night of the fire. He described a shadowy figure lurking near the house, a man he recognized as a local businessman named Mr. Harding, a man who had been embroiled in a bitter dispute with Samuel's uncle over a land development project. Mr. Abernathy testified that he had seen Mr. Harding pouring a liquid substance around the foundation of the house just hours before the fire broke out. He had dismissed it at the time, attributing it to some sort of landscaping activity. But in light of recent events, he realized the horrific truth. Mr. Harding had deliberately set the fire. Mr. Abernathy's testimony corroborated Samuel's claim, providing concrete evidence that supported the boy's version of events. It was a bombshell, a game-changer that shattered the prosecution's case and shifted the balance of power in the courtroom. Following Mr. Abernathy's testimony, the prosecution, desperate to salvage their case, called Mr. Harding to the stand. The courtroom held its breath as Harding, a man with a carefully cultivated air of respectability, took the oath that he denied any involvement in the fire, portraying himself as a victim of circumstance, a successful businessman unfairly targeted by malicious rumors. But the defense, armed with Mr. Abernathy's testimony and a growing body of circumstantial evidence, launched a relentless cross-examination. They questioned Harding about his dispute with Samuel's uncle, his financial troubles, and his suspicious activities on the night of the fire. Harding, initially composed, grew increasingly agitated under the pressure, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. Then, in a dramatic moment, Samuel was called to the stand. He stood before Harding, his small frame radiating an unexpected strength. His eyes, once filled with confusion and fear, now burned with a righteous anger. He looked directly at Harding and, in a clear, unwavering voice, asked, "Why did you do it?" Harding, visibly shaken, stammered a denial, but Samuel persisted, recounting the events of that night, describing the shadowy figure he had seen watching the fire. As he spoke, the full meaning of his 4 words, "He saw the fire," became clear. He wasn't just saying that someone witnessed the blaze. He was identifying the perpetrator. He was accusing Harding of arson and murder. The truth, long hidden in the shadows, was finally brought into the light, exposing a shocking tale of greed, betrayal, and unspeakable cruelty. The jury deliberated for hours, weighing the evidence, poring over the testimony, and grappling with the complex web of deceit that had been unveiled. Finally, they returned to the courtroom, their faces etched with solemnity. The tension was almost unbearable as the foreman rose to deliver the verdict. "In the matter of the state versus Samuel," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "we find the defendant not guilty." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Relief washed over Samuel's face, tears streaming down his cheeks. Mr. Peterson, his defense lawyer, embraced him tightly, his own eyes brimming with emotion. Judge Thompson, her expression unreadable, nodded solemnly, acknowledging the jury's decision. Ms. Davies, the prosecutor, looked defeated, her face pale with shock that Mr. Harding, who had been sitting calmly throughout the proceedings, suddenly erupted in a fit of rage, shouting accusations and denials. He was quickly subdued by the bailiffs and led away, his reputation in tatters, his future uncertain. The courtroom erupted in chaos, a mixture of cheers, sobs, and angry protests. Samuel, finally exonerated, was surrounded by supporters, their faces radiant with joy. The truth had prevailed, justice had been served, and a young boy's life had been saved, but the scars of the ordeal would remain, a constant reminder of the dark forces that had threatened to destroy him. The aftermath of the verdict was a whirlwind of emotions, a testament to the power of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring importance of a fair and impartial justice system. In the aftermath of the trial, Samuel faced the daunting task of rebuilding his life. He was placed in the care of his maternal grandmother, a kind and loving woman who provided him with a stable and supportive home. He returned to school, where he was greeted with a mixture of sympathy and admiration. The trauma of the fire and the ordeal of the trial left their mark, but Samuel proved to be remarkably resilient, that he found solace in his art, expressing his emotions through vivid drawings and paintings. The case of Samuel became a local sensation, a testament to the power of truth and the importance of a fair and impartial justice system. That it sparked a renewed focus on arson investigations and a greater emphasis on protecting the rights of vulnerable individuals. That Samuel's courageous act, his decision to speak out despite the risks, inspired others to come forward with their own stories of injustice and